Welcome to the Saturday Cup of Joe, week 261. Got my cup of Joe here. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. I will be celebrating and remembering. I hope you celebrate and remember the mothers in your life and hope you have a great weekend. I just had two quick thoughts this week that I wanted to share with you. The first one was a headline for an article I didn't even click on, but it was anxiety returning to normal question mark. And I think I had several thoughts. One was, well, why do we have to return to normal? I mean, I get that there's anxiety coming out of a global pandemic, coming out of a year of disruption. I mean, one of the things I wrote about last week was I still believe we haven't quite seen the great reshuffling of our lives. We stayed in our homes and worked from home. Many of the policies are being either eased or lifted. So people who haven't gone back to work yet are starting to go back to the office, or travel policies are starting to return for companies to travel, people to travel. So that's going to make it feel quote unquote normal. But I don't think we should return to normal. I think we should return to what's next. I think we should return to things. I just wanted to put it out there that part of the result here is that things are going to be different, and that's totally fine. And it sounds a little generic. It probably even sounds a little cliche, but I'm just thinking of it that way because the anxiety part wasn't what caught my attention. I think there's always anxiety in any big changes. I think if your company even moves buildings or moves headquarters, I think that would be a disruption. That would be a change, and there may come some anxiety or anxiousness or something like that with even small changes like that that we've all maybe experienced at one time or another in our careers. But for me, the thought was this normal piece. And I've always kind of bristled at this, like, let's make it normal or let's make it status quo. When I first joined Quicken Loans, I had a senior leader who would basically, call it status go, right? As an effort to like always be pushing the status quo forward and creating a new status quo and then outdoing that one. And so I think that's kind of the culture that it still resonates with me. Said not return to normal. Let's return to what's next. I saw a really great quote this week. I'll read it and then I'll put it in the post below the video. But Srinivas Rao was quoted as saying, if you want to live an exceptional and extraordinary life, you have to give up many of the things that are part of a normal one. And so, part of, I think, what is exciting about what's next and why I get excited about the great reshuffling is this possibility of, exceeding expectations and an extraordinary result if you embrace it and if you go for it. And this is one of those moments that kind of gives the freedom to do that, gives the freedom to not return to quote unquote normal, but return to something new and different and exceptional. So that's one thought I had. I would love to hear your thoughts on what we're going back to or something like that. I'll put a link rather in the post again below the video, but an example of things not returning to normal in at least housing, home ownership, things like home values. So we're seeing home prices skyrocket in many cities. That means 10, 12, 15% year over year value appreciation across the market. That's pretty exceptional for home value appreciation in a year. So that would be an example where that's not likely to return to normal after this. And while it may, in my theory, reshuffle the country a bit, I don't think we're going to see a major decline year over year by 10 or 12% to home values after this. So there's a lot of things that won't be normal. I mean, uh, I don't know what everyone's go back to work policy looks like, but I'd be very surprised if companies are going to strict 5 days a week in the office policies for many, many jobs after this. There'll be a few, obviously, some of those critical type roles that can't not be in the office, whether it's a pandemic or not, obviously. But I'm saying that flexibility for many jobs, and especially white collar jobs, it's going to be a couple of days in the office or much more flexibility to work or live wherever you want. So it'll be super interesting to see how we deal with that. I think it coincides with the millennial generation in an interesting way. I had a fun conversation this week about um, what millennials expect from title, purpose, compensation. And, I like to think of it in its most positive form, which is we have very high expectations and we have very high expectations of the companies we work for. But I think it's also seen in a lot of ways, or sometimes misconstrued and sometimes appropriately construed as entitlement. And so I think as we walk that line, it'll be interesting for companies to deal with kind of both things coming together. Millennials with very high expectations combined with this proof now that we can work or live anywhere um, and make it work. Another CEO I talked to this week, identified that innovation tax, that tax he was saying is the cost of not being in the office, that there's a lack of serendipity or innovation that he finds really valuable. And so you may have companies with innovation days in the office, right? Maybe 1 or 2 days a week you're in the office for your innovation or your meetings, and then other days you're working from home. And so I could get on board with that. I think that type of flexibility, that type of intentionality, what you're in the office for and why is huge. And I think that could make a big difference in our kind of go back to work, both easing anxiety, but then also embracing, like I said, what's next, the new environment in which we want to work. So that was one thing I think we're going to continue to talk about for months, maybe years. And I'll obviously have thoughts on it, but that's one I wanted to get you thinking about. The other thing I wanted um, to propose was the idea. I like putting these questions out there. We're all leaders in our companies, we're all leaders of teams, we all have goals, even those of us who don't want a boss. And if you're out there working for yourself, entrepreneur, self-employed, this question hopefully still applies and is interesting to you. I was listening to Theo Epstein in an interview, and he was talking about how we don't know very much about baseball, that we only know about 5% of what makes baseball special or great, and we're still learning, and we don't have that many insights. And one of the things he was kind of saying was like, as you're building a baseball team or as you're thinking about leading a company, it is a company, I guess is the better way to put it. That when he was the general manager of the Red Sox or the Cubs, he was leading a company, and and as the CEO or general manager or leader, he had to understand, like, what's our insight here? What are we saying? And I thought what's your insight was a really good way to frame up the question for us, which is, as we think about, a founder or a startup, I'll often ask the question, what is the insight that this company has that they don't think anybody else has or that they're capitalizing on? Well, it's the same thing for our careers, right? What is your insight? What's your contribution that is different or unique to the market? In this case, the market being your company or your team. And then what's your company's insight, obviously. But it can be really granular in a given situation or in a given role, your career, your life. What's your insight? What is the perspective you bring to the market? And then it can be really broad. In other words, as you're looking at the purpose of your company or starting a company or you're evaluating ideas, what is that insight that is different or new? And if it's not different or new enough, then I think there's a piece of it that is, you know, we need to let it go, or that's a good evaluation of not following through on that particular idea or that particular company. And then in your own career, I think it also gives some perspective, maybe to that first thing I was talking about with entitlement, which is to say, what's my insight? What is the thing I'm contributing that is necessary and is value? And so I always like thinking about value, and I always thought a lot about our own certain set of skills, our own certain set of experiences that contribute to our decision making, our leadership. So I'd like to throw that out there. The quote that goes along with this one that I read this week, this one was by Robert Brault. And I don't know who Robert Brault is. That's not a name I recognize, but the quote's phenomenal. We are kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. And I think that's a nice way to think about not only how we frame up success and our goals, but also in this question, in the context of the question, what's your insight? Um, what is going to be the differentiating value, the perspective in any situation, again, big or small. Whether you're tackling one problem, one task this week, or whether you're making a big choice about life, career, company, purpose, what's going to be the insight? Where did it come from? Where'd you get it? And how are you contributing it? So don't be kept down by obstacles, and don't be kept down by a clear path to a lesser goal. Let's live that exceptional, extraordinary life and not return to normal this week. Thanks. Have a great week. Talk to you soon. Continued success.